Historical figures. Nelson Mandela. Welcome to History Explained, where we illuminate the past to better understand our present. I'm your guide to your daily journey through the past to empower the future. Today is Tuesday, June 10, 2025. As we do every Tuesday, we're exploring a remarkable individual whose life and achievements transformed not only their own nation but inspired movements for justice and equality around the world. Today, we turn our attention to Nelson Mandela, the South African anti-apartheid revolutionary who became his country's first black president and one of the most revered moral leaders of the 20th century. Mandela's extraordinary journey from rural village to law office, from underground resistance fighter to political prisoner, and finally from prisoner to president, represents one of history's most compelling stories of personal transformation and national reconciliation. What makes Nelson Mandela particularly inspiring is how he embodied the possibility of overcoming hatred with forgiveness, replacing vengeance with reconciliation, and transforming oppression into opportunity for all. His life demonstrates how individual moral courage, sustained over decades of struggle, can ultimately triumph over institutionalized injustice and racial oppression. So let's explore the remarkable life of Nelson Mandela, examining his early formation in rural South Africa, his emergence as a leader of the anti-apartheid movement, his long imprisonment and moral evolution, and his crucial role in South Africa's peaceful transition to democracy. Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela was born on July 18, 1918, in the village of Mbizo in the Eastern Cape province of South Africa. His birth name, Rolihlahla, meant pulling the branch of a tree, in Xhosa, though it was colloquially interpreted as troublemaker, a prophetic name for someone who would challenge South Africa's racial hierarchy throughout his life. Mandela was born into the Tembu royal family, though his branch was not in the direct line of succession. His father, Gadla Henry Mphakaniswa, served as a local chief and councillor to the Tembu region. This traditional authority gave young Mandela early exposure to leadership, governance, and the oral traditions that preserved African history and culture. The death of Mandela's father when Nelson was 9 years old dramatically changed his circumstances. The Tembu regent, Jongintaba Dalindyebo, became his guardian and raised him at the royal court in Mkhitarhini. This experience provided Mandela with an education in both traditional African governance and the complex relationships between African societies and the expanding white-dominated South African state. At the regent's court, Mandela observed traditional decision-making processes that emphasized consensus, consultation, and the inclusion of different viewpoints. These early lessons in inclusive leadership would later influence his approach to politics and his vision for a democratic South Africa. However, he also witnessed the subordination of traditional African authorities to white colonial power, experiences that planted early seeds of political consciousness. Mandela's formal education began at local mission schools, where he received his English name, Nelson, from a teacher who, following common practice, gave African students English names. He excelled academically and was groomed for leadership within traditional structures, attending Methodist schools that provided education for the African elite. In 1939, Mandela enrolled at the University of Fort Hare, often called the Oxford of Africa, because it educated many of the continent's future leaders. Fort Hare brought together students from across southern and eastern Africa, exposing Mandela to Pan-African ideas and continental perspectives on colonialism and racial oppression. At Fort Hare, Mandela encountered other future leaders including Oliver Tambo, who would become a lifelong friend and political ally, and Robert Mugabe, who would later lead Zimbabwe. The university environment fostered political discussions and exposed students to ideas about African nationalism, democracy, and human rights that would shape their future activism. However, Mandela's time at Fort Hare was cut short when he was suspended for participating in a student boycott over food quality and institutional policies. This early act of defiance foreshadowed his later willingness to challenge unjust authority, even at personal cost. Fleeing an arranged marriage organized by his guardian, Mandela made his way to Johannesburg in 1941, where he encountered the harsh realities of urban life under South Africa's racial laws. Working first as a mine security guard and later as an articled clerk at a law firm, he experienced firsthand the legal and economic systems designed to maintain white supremacy and African subordination. In Johannesburg, Mandela completed his Bachelor of Arts degree by correspondence and began studying law at the University of the Witwatersrand. As one of the few black students at WITS, he faced both academic challenges and social isolation, but also formed important friendships with white, Indian, and colored students who shared progressive political views. The law studies were transformative for Mandela, providing him with analytical tools for understanding South Africa's legal system and its role in maintaining racial oppression. Legal training also offered practical skills for challenging unjust laws and defending those persecuted by the apartheid system. During this period, Mandela became involved with the African National Congress, ANC, which had been founded in 1912 as the South African Native National Congress to defend African political rights. Initially, the ANC pursued moderate tactics, petitioning authorities and seeking gradual reform through legal channels. However, younger members like Mandela became increasingly frustrated with the organization's cautious approach. In 1944, Mandela co-founded the ANC Youth League along with Oliver Tambo and Walter Sisulu. The Youth League advocated for more militant tactics and African nationalism, arguing that the ANC needed to mobilize mass resistance rather than relying on petitions and negotiations with white authorities who showed little interest in meaningful reform. The Youth League's influence grew significantly after the National Party's victory in the 1948 election brought apartheid into full legal force. The new government systematically codified racial segregation through laws like the Population Registration Act, which classified all South Africans by race, and the Group Areas Act, which forcibly relocated millions of people based on racial categories. These apartheid laws convinced many ANC members that moderate tactics were insufficient and that organized resistance was necessary. In 1949, the ANC adopted the Youth League's Program of Action, which called for boycotts, strikes, civil disobedience, and non-cooperation with apartheid institutions. Mandela quickly emerged as a key leader of the new militant approach. In 1952, he was elected ANC president of the Transvaal province and played a central role in organizing the Defiance Campaign, a massive civil disobedience movement that challenged apartheid laws by deliberately violating racial restrictions. The Defiance Campaign saw thousands of volunteers, including Mandela, deliberately breaking apartheid laws and accepting arrest to highlight the injustice of the system. While the campaign did not achieve its immediate goals of forcing policy changes, it demonstrated the potential for mass resistance and established Mandela's reputation as a fearless leader willing to sacrifice his personal freedom for the cause of justice. During the 1950s, Mandela also established South Africa's first black law partnership with Oliver Tambo. Their practice in Johannesburg provided legal representation for Africans facing apartheid prosecution and gave Mandela direct experience with how the legal system functioned to maintain racial oppression. The law practice also provided a base for political organizing and a means of supporting the liberation movement. The apartheid government's increasingly repressive responses to peaceful protests convinced many ANC leaders that nonviolent resistance alone would not achieve their goals. The 1960 Sharpeville massacre, where police killed 69 peaceful protesters, marked a turning point that led to the abandonment of purely non-violent tactics. In response to Sharpeville and the government's banning of the ANC, Mandela helped establish Umkhonto we Sizwe, Spear of the Nation, the ANC's armed wing. As Umkhonto's first commander-in-chief, Mandela oversaw a campaign of sabotage targeting government facilities and infrastructure while avoiding civilian casualties. The decision to embrace armed struggle was difficult for Mandela, who had initially been committed to non-violent resistance. However, he concluded that the apartheid government's violence against peaceful protesters left no alternative but to respond with force. This pragmatic approach to tactics, choosing methods based on effectiveness rather than ideology, would characterize Mandela's leadership throughout his career. Mandela's underground activities required him to live clandestinely, adopting disguises and false identities while evading police surveillance. Known as the Black Pimpernel, he traveled secretly throughout South Africa and abroad, seeking support for the liberation movement and military training for guerrilla warfare. His secret travels took him to London, where he met with British politicians and media figures, and to Algeria and Ethiopia, where he received military training and studied guerrilla warfare tactics. These international experiences broadened Mandela's perspective and connected the South African struggle to broader movements for decolonization and human rights. However, Mandela's underground career ended abruptly on August 5, 1962, when he was arrested by police acting on information provided by the CIA. Initially charged with leaving the country illegally and inciting strikes, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. But worse was to come. In 1963, police raided the ANC's secret headquarters at Liliesleaf Farm and discovered documents linking Mandela to Umkhonto's sabotage campaign. Along with 9 other ANC leaders, he was charged with sabotage and conspiracy to overthrow the government, crimes that carried the death penalty. The Rivonia trial, named after the suburb where the arrests occurred, became one of the most significant political trials of the 20th century. Mandela used the trial as a platform to articulate the moral case against apartheid and explain why the liberation movement had turned to armed resistance. His statement from the dock on April 20, 1964, became one of the most powerful speeches in the struggle for human rights. Mandela declared, "I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." On June 12, 1964, Mandela and 7 co-defendants were sentenced to life imprisonment, avoiding the death penalty largely due to international pressure and the moral power of their defense. Mandela would spend the next 27 years in prison, becoming the world's most famous political prisoner. The early years of imprisonment on Robben Island were harsh. Political prisoners were subjected to hard labor in limestone quarries, poor food, and limited contact with the outside world. Mandela and other ANC leaders were classified as the lowest category of prisoners, denying them basic privileges and subjecting them to particular brutality from guards. However, Mandela refused to be broken by prison conditions. Instead, he used his time to continue his education, studying for a law degree by correspondence and learning Afrikaans to better understand his captors. He also worked to maintain discipline and morale among political prisoners, establishing study groups and organizing resistance to prison regulations. Perhaps most importantly, Mandela underwent a profound personal evolution during his imprisonment. While maintaining his commitment to justice and equality, he gradually abandoned bitterness and hatred toward his oppressors. This spiritual transformation would prove crucial to his later role in South Africa's peaceful transition to democracy. The prison years also saw Mandela's global stature grow as international campaigns demanded his release. The Free Mandela movement became a worldwide cause, with concerts, boycotts, and protests keeping his case in international headlines. This global attention put increasing pressure on the apartheid government while demonstrating that the struggle for human rights transcended national boundaries. By the 1980s, apartheid South Africa faced mounting international isolation through sanctions and divestment campaigns, while domestic resistance intensified through township uprisings and continued ANC operations. The end of the Cold War also changed strategic calculations, as the apartheid government could no longer justify its policies as necessary to prevent communist expansion. In 1989, F.W. de Klerk became South Africa's president and recognized that fundamental change was inevitable. Secret negotiations began between the government and imprisoned ANC leaders, with Mandela playing a central role despite his continued incarceration. On February 11, 1990, after 27 years in prison, Nelson Mandela walked free from Victor Verster prison near Cape Town. His release was broadcast live around the world, creating one of the most iconic moments of the late 20th century. At age 71, Mandela emerged from prison not as a broken man seeking revenge, but as a leader committed to reconciliation and peaceful transition. The 4 years between Mandela's release and South Africa's first democratic elections in 1994 were marked by complex negotiations, continued violence, and the gradual dismantling of apartheid. Mandela's leadership during this transition period was crucial, as he worked to prevent civil war while building consensus for a new democratic order. The negotiations required Mandela to balance competing demands from his own supporters, who wanted rapid change and redistribution, with the concerns of white South Africans, who feared for their security and economic interests. His ability to reassure all parties while maintaining momentum toward democracy demonstrated exceptional political skill. On April 27, 1994, South Africa held its first fully democratic elections, with voters of all races participating equally for the first time in the country's history. The ANC won a decisive victory, and on May 10, 1994, Nelson Mandela was inaugurated as South Africa's first black president at age 75. Mandela's presidency from 1994 to 1999 focused on national reconciliation, building democratic institutions, and beginning to address the massive inequalities inherited from apartheid. He established the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to investigate past human rights violations while promoting forgiveness rather than vengeance. Perhaps Mandela's greatest achievement as president was preventing the racial civil war that many had predicted would accompany majority rule. His emphasis on reconciliation, symbolized by gestures like wearing the Springbok rugby jersey at the 1995 World Cup final, helped unite South Africans around a new national identity. After serving one term as president, Mandela voluntarily stepped down in 1999, setting an important precedent for democratic leadership in Africa. His retirement from active politics allowed him to focus on charitable work, including efforts to combat HIV, AIDS, and promote education. Nelson Mandela died on December 5, 2013, at age 95, prompting worldwide mourning and celebration of his extraordinary life. His funeral brought together world leaders and ordinary citizens in a testament to his global impact and moral authority. Mandela's legacy extends far beyond South Africa's borders. His life demonstrated that individuals can overcome seemingly impossible circumstances through courage, perseverance, and moral conviction. His emphasis on reconciliation over revenge provided a model for other societies emerging from conflict and oppression. Perhaps most importantly, Mandela showed that true leadership requires the ability to forgive one's enemies and work for the common good rather than narrow partisan interests. His transformation from militant revolutionary to reconciling statesman illustrates the potential for personal growth and the power of moral leadership to transform entire societies. The challenges facing post-apartheid South Africa, including persistent inequality, corruption, and social problems, remind us that even the most inspiring leaders cannot single-handedly solve complex social problems. However, Mandela's example continues to inspire new generations of leaders committed to justice, equality, and human dignity. Thank you for joining us for this exploration of Nelson Mandela's extraordinary life and legacy. Tomorrow, we'll be back with our World Events episode where we'll be examining the Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s and its lasting impact on Middle Eastern geopolitics and international relations. If you enjoyed this journey through history, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. We'd also love to hear your thoughts. What aspects of Mandela's leadership and moral example do you find most inspiring, and how do you think his lessons apply to contemporary challenges facing democracy and human rights? Let us know in the comments section below. For our members, this Sunday we'll have a special roundup of historical figures from the past week with additional insights connecting their leadership examples to contemporary challenges. Until next time, I'm your guide for History Explained, where we believe that understanding yesterday is the key to navigating tomorrow.